لقد كان لكم في رسول الله أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر وذكر الله كثيرا.
الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه وعلى عفوه بعد قدرته، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. أما بعد، فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ جاءتكم جنود فأرسلنا عليهم ريحا وجنودا لم تروها وكان الله بما تعملون بصيرا. صدق الله العظيم. Respected viewers, welcome back once again to our program, The Perfect Example. In our last program, we spoke about Ghazwa Ahzab, the expedition and the war of the Confederates, the Allied forces, also known as Ghazwa Khandak, the expedition and war of the trench. The reasons behind it were mentioned. Because the enemies outnumbered materially and physically the Muslims, Nabi Karim Sallallahu adopted a strategy of fighting this war behind the trench, and in this way to frustrate the enemy. Nabi Karim Sallallahu was in the forefront, literally so to speak, in the trenches, in digging the trench. Beautiful incidents with regard to it. The poetry that was recited by the companions were narrated in our last program. We concluded the last program by the amazing incident of Hazrat Jabir radiallahu ta'ala, who invited Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wasallam with a group of companions, and Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam told all the companions to come, and that food which was prepared for few people sufficed for the entire army. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wasallam, after digging the trench, the Quraysh and the Allied, the Ahzab, the army of the Allied forces came into Medina Munawwara, and all of a sudden they stopped when they saw the trench. Abu Sufyan remarked and said that this particular manner of warfare is foreign to Arabia. This must have been taught to Muhammad, or the Muslims must have adopted it from a different place, a different people. And as we said, it was Salman Farsi, Salman the Persian, who had given this particular method and strategy which was adopted by the Muslims. Now at this particular stage they could not move. If they moved collectively, they would not have been able to cross the trench. Also, on the other hand, as I said last week, Medina was naturally fortified by three directions. So for a while they stayed behind, weighing their options, and then one of the options that they came up with was the aspect that they would go to Qurayza, Bani Qurayza. As I said, Medina was only vulnerable to the north. To the south of Medina and the east and west was protected by volcanic rocks, which a ground force could not come over those volcanic rocks, or would have come through very great difficulty, and they would have been finished or picked up by the Muslims had they gone that route. So they went to the Bani Qurayza. And Huyay ibn Akhtab, also one of the leaders of the Jews, the Bani Nadir, come to the tribe of Bani Qurayza, and his name was Ka'b bin Ashraf, and he knocks at the door. Ka'b bin Ashraf initially refuses to accommodate him and tells Huyay, "Oh Huyay, whenever you have come, you have brought problems upon our tribe. Don't come and try to change our agreement that we have with Muhammad and the Muslims. The Muslims have always adhered and upheld that agreement. We don't want to violate that agreement, because we will be in difficulty. We have to remain with the Muslims and we have to stay with the Muslims. And you will come and go and we will have to remain." But Huyay ibn Akhtab did not take no for an answer. He said, "Please just open the door. And when you open the door, let me sit and talk. Let me give you some options." And he manages to convince Ka'b bin Ashraf to go against the agreement and to join the forces. This was a very difficult moment for the Muslims. The reason being, on one hand, they had to protect themselves from the from the trench, against the allied forces. And now someone from within, the Bani Qurayza, has sided with the enemy. And so they were surrounded from both sides, the enemies and from within. When Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard this, he was extremely perturbed. He sent 3 people. He sent 3 people and he told them that, go and find out, is there truth in this? Sa'd bin Mu'adh, Sa'd bin Ubadah, Abdullah bin Rawaha, Ansar from Medina went to go and ascertain this. When they try to speak to Ka'b bin Ashraf, he avoids and shuns the topic, which gives rise to the fact that yes, he has violated the agreement and he has given his words to the Quraysh and Ghatfan and to the allied forces that he will help them against Islam and the Muslims. Now Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam is surrounded from both sides. When the 3 come back, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells them, don't come and openly say with regard to what you say. Just give me an indication. So they come and tell Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Adal and Qara. Adal and Qara were that particular tribe that treacherously lured companions to them and then they killed them. They martyred them. So when they said Adal and Qara, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam realized that these people have violated the agreement and they have betrayed the Muslims despite the agreement that they have signed. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam is greatly worried. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran has made mention with regard to it. And He said, إِذْ جَاءُوكُم مِّن فَوْقِكُمْ وَمِنْ أَسْفَلَ مِنْكُمْ. And recall the time when the enemies were on top of you and behind you and at the bottom of you. One side the enemies, one side from within the Bani Qurayza. وَإِذْ زَاغَتِ الْأَبْصَارُ. Your eyes started moving in horror. وَبَلَغَتِ الْقُلُوبُ الْحَنَاجِرِ. Your hearts came up to your throats. وَتَظُنُّونَ بِاللَّهِ الظُّنُونَ. You start having ill thoughts about Allah. That is Allah Ta'ala going to leave you to the forces. And Allah Ta'ala is going to forsake you. هُنَالِكَ بَتُلِيَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَزُلْزِلُوا زِلْزَالًا شَدِيدًا. That's the time when Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala tested the believers and gave them a violent type of tremor. A tremor that caused them concern and anxiety. And obviously, being human beings, they were extremely perturbed at that circumstances. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he came to know about it, Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam then looked at what to do. Firstly, he got the women and children to be safely fortified in one particular place. But all the time, the Sahaba Ikram were protecting the trench, but at the same time now they were worried about the women and children because Bani Qurayza had assured the allied forces of entry from that particular side, which could have proved difficult because now they could attack the women and the children. So the Sahaba Ikram were extremely perturbed at this situation. There was that particular situation that when the women and children were in there, Hazrat Hassan ibn Thabit was placed and he was told and given the responsibility to look after the women and children. When someone suspicious comes by that particular tent where the women and children were, Safiya radiallahu ta'ala, the aunt of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sees him, tells unto Hassan, Hassan, deal with him. This person is looking suspicious. He is maybe taking where the women and children are and going to pass that message out to the enemies and they might attack us. Hassan ibn Thabit said, I don't know what to do. Hassan ibn Thabit was a poet and he was not a warrior, especially in an era and an age where people who were brave and people of chivalry were greatly and highly admired and regarded and respected. But you see, it's very important for us to learn a lesson from here. Sometimes a person might not be good in one aspect, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might give him a talent in another aspect. And while he was not good in terms of warfare, or he was not as good as Khalid bin Walid, Abu Dujana, Ali radiallahu ta'ala, Umar radiallahu ta'ala, and others, yet he was a master in poetry. And he used to compose poems in defense of Islam and the Muslims, especially in a time when poetry was greatly in vogue and people used poetry to attack one another and to convince one another and to influence people through the means of the poetry. And when Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Hassan ibn Thabit used to stand on the mimbar of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, composing and rendering and reading out those poetry in defense of Islam and the Muslims, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Oh Allah, help him with Ruh Qudus, help him with Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam in composing the right poetry to defend Islam and the Muslims." What a great management lesson we learn, that people have different skills. use them according to their skills. Now this particular aspect was, as I said, very greatly disturbing to the Muslims. Now, Sahaba Ikram, the munafiq and the hypocrites, they went to Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam and they said, يَقُولُونَ إِنَّ بُيُوتَنَا عَوْرَةٌ وَمَا هِيَ بِعَوْرَةٍ إِن يُرِيدُونَ إِلَّا فِرَارًا. O Prophet of Almighty Allah, they came with excuses and said that our homes are exposed. But it was not the matter of exposure. It was a matter that they would like to flee the battlefield. So Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam left them. And yet at the same time, the sincere believers had a complete different reaction. We will see their reaction after the break. Respected viewers, welcome back once again to our program. Prior to the break, we were speaking about the Battle of the Trench, how difficult it was upon the companions. On one hand, you had the Allied forces, great amount of 3 times the number of the Muslims, 3 or 4 times the number of the Muslims. And then the news filters through that the Bani Qurayza in Medina Munawwara has aligned themselves against the agreement they had with Islam and the Muslims and the citizens of Medina with the Allied forces. Instead, the agreement was, we will collectively defend Medina against all attacks from any foreign or allied or forces outside Medina. Here they gave their word to the Allied forces that we will help you to attack them from a different direction. So while the Muslims were defending in one direction, here there was now a fear about attack from the other direction. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam comes to know about the betrayal. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam now gathers. It was an extremely difficult time. Added to this, it was the time of winter. And that time there was severe winter winds that came. It was chilly. The Muslims didn't have enough to cover themselves, didn't have enough to eat. One Sahabi came to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam to complain and said, Ya Rasulullah, he lifted up his kurta. He had one stone tied to his stomach to indicate that he had tied the stone, that he cannot bear the pangs of hunger. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam lifted his kurta and Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam showed him 2 stones that he had tied to bear the pangs of hunger. And that Salma radiallahu ta'ala says, I was in the tent. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to go out to protect that the tent or the trench must not be, people must not jump over the trench and it must not be breached. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to come in the tent and he used to hear a noise. And immediately, instead of resting, he used to go out and said, what is the noise? Has someone managed to breach the trench? And he said, in this way, 4 salat of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was qaza. No other battle other than this particular battle where 4 salat became qaza. Such was the difficulty. And they used to throw arrows. And they used to use the bow and arrows to try and, make, and of course, use that as a means of intimidating the Muslims. And all the time, they were firing this bow and arrows and these arrows. So Muslims had to be on guard all the time, not knowing when the arrows will come, when the bow and arrows will be fired. And in this way, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was in that particular state. And as I said, Salma said, I didn't see any other battle in which there was so much great difficulty upon Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This lasted for over a month. For 1 month, the Sahaba Ikram ridwanullahi ajma'in were in such a situation. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam used to read this dua, Allahumma astur awratina wa amin rawatina. Oh Allah, cover our faults and give us safety from our anxieties. In this way, sometimes there were people who came across, 2 people came across. One was Amr bin Abdewud, one of the most famous warriors in Arabian Peninsula. He managed to come over the trench and he knew, of course, that, if I go here, there are 3,000 Sahaba, I would not be able to fight all of them. So he said, Hal min Mubaris, is there anyone who will challenge me? Now this was a method of warfare at that time, that once a person asked for an individual combat, although not obliged to, people could have attacked him directly, and this was, a normal warfare, but because of the chivalry of Arabia at that time, it was regarded to be a dishonor. Someone calls you for an individual combat and you don't respond. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, this is a famous warrior, Amr bin Abdewud. Who's going to confront him? Ali radiallahu anhu got up and said, Ya Rasulullah, allow me to confront him. Ali radiallahu anhu was in his early 20s. He was not in terms of experience as Amr bin Abdewud. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, oh Ali, sit down. Let someone else volunteer. You are still young, inexperienced compared to the veteran Amr bin Abd Wud. And again Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, is there anyone willing to confront him? Again Ali radiallahu anhu got up before anyone could say anything. Ya Rasulullah, allow me to confront him. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Ali, sit down. And then the third time Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Halmim, is there anyone who will confront him? And Ali radiallahu anhu got up again and said, Ya Rasulullah, allow me to confront him, even if it is Abd Wud. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gives him du'as. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam allows him. And then Ali radiallahu anhu goes and confronts Amr bin Abd Wud. And the Sahaba said such a fierce battle ensued that both these people were covered in dust. And we did not know what was happening. And we just saw dust. And we heard people screaming and fighting. The two individuals, until we heard Ali radiallahu ta'ala says, Allahu Akbar, I have killed the enemy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One person who manages to come across or attempts to cross was Nawfal bin Abdullah, and he falls into the trench and he dies in that trench. Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam leaves him there. So these two people, they try to cross the trench, they come across, one manages and he is killed by Ali radiallahu anhu, the other one falls into the trench, and so the Quraysh had no other way. Now they started putting pressure upon the Qurayza, allow us now to come and attack the Muslims from that direction. Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam now seeing the situation, seeing the anxiety, Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam sends a message to the Ghatfam, one of the most prominent of the allied forces, Quraysh, Bani Nadir, and the Ghatfan. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam calls them for negotiations, and he said, we will give you substantial amount of the agriculture and the produce of Medina. You move out of the force. You move out of the alliance. So sometimes you have to keep this in mind. These are the type of things that are used as strategy to prevent yourself from harm. So Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam uses the strategy. Sa'ad bin Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, the leader of the Ansar, of course of the Aus, and he sees this and he was not very happy with this. And he said, Ya Rasulullah, when we were weak, when we didn't have Iman, we never used to compromise in such a way. We never used to bring ourselves in such a way to compromise on things that we were not happy with. And in this way, in a way, it's showing our weakness. We are giving our produce with the intention of a compromise. Ya Rasulullah, Allah has given us Iman. We will stick with you. There is some difficulty, but we will remain steadfast. Ya Rasulullah, don't give them. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saw the harshness, harsh conditions, saw the difficulty upon the companions, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, not because of his own self, but because of his companions, thought this would have been a strategy to bring disarray in the ranks of the allied forces. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam offered it. But when he saw the determination of Sa'ad bin Mu'adh and the Iman, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, okay, we will not do so. We will remain behind the trench, and we will remain, and we will withhold the siege, and we will continue in this particular way. Sa'ad bin Mu'adh radiallahu anhu then makes a dua. And he said, oh Allah, if this is going to be the last time when the enemies attack Medina, then take my life in this battle. But if there are other battles to follow in which Medina is going to be attacked, keep me alive, because I want to uphold the agreement that I made with the Nabi of Allah, that I will remain steadfast to him and I will protect him while he's in Medina. It so happened that this was going to be the last defensive war fought by the Muslims in the time of Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Sa'ad bin Mu'adh goes and visits his mother. Hazrat Aisha radiallahu ta'ala says, when he came and he visited his mother, I noticed that a portion of him was uncovered by the armor that normally people wear. And I had in my mind that Sa'ad bin Mu'adh is not covering himself properly. And it so happened that he went back to the arena, and he went back to the battlefield. Then an arrow pierced Sa'ad bin Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala, which later led to his martyrdom. This was Sa'ad bin Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala. In the meanwhile, a person by the name of Nu'aym bin Mas'ud, he comes and he's from the Ghatfan clan. He had secretly accepted Islam, but he did not show his Islam. So he came to Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Ya Rasulullah, I got a strategy. Allow me to use the strategy to create disarray in the forces of the enemy and to make them disunited. And inshallah, through the means of that, they will have to leave and depart from here. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, go ahead, you got my permission. So Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gives him the permission. Nu'aym bin Mas'ud does two things. Amazing strategy. What he does, he goes to the Quraysh and said, do you know that the Bani Qurayza are in Medina? They got a valid agreement that they will protect Medina from foreign forces. You don't know. They told you they will help you. They told you they will help you. But this helping of theirs is in reality a betrayal against us. And what they are going to do is next time you tell them that they must play their part, they're going to ask you for 50 of your most reputed warriors to be given to them so that they'll play their part, but they got 50 of your warriors. And those warriors, they're going to hand them over to the Muslims. Then he goes to Ka'b bin Ashraf of Bani Qurayza and says, Bani Qurayza, Quraysh are going to go away from here. If they don't succeed in their objective, you are going to be left with the Muslims. And they are more superior than you. So therefore, when the Quraysh tells you to attack the Muslims, tell them you will attack on one condition, and that is they must give 50 of your warriors. And when they give 50 of their warriors, then you got them that they have committed themselves, then you attack. Otherwise they will make you attack, and they will leave you. And they will leave you to the forces of the Muslims, and you would not be able to resist the forces. So when Abu Sufyan sends a message to Bani Qurayza that you play your part, Bani Qurayza said, give me 50 of your warriors. Because if you don't do so, you might leave us and go away. Then what Nuaym bin Mas'ud did, it became the means of them starting to worry. This is the situation. So then this created disarray in the forces of the allied forces. The strategy of Nuaym bin Mas'ud worked in this way. He created disunity in the ranks of the allied forces. So the Quraysh didn't give the 50 warriors because now Nuaym bin Mas'ud said that 50 warriors are going to be handed to the Muslims. And when they asked for the 50 warriors, when it was not forthcoming, they started doubting the Quraysh. So in both ways, both didn't play their part with one another. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved the Muslims. Remember what Allah ta'ala says in Surah Ahzab. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ جاءتكم جنود فأرسلنا عليهم ريحا وجنودا لم تروها. Remember Allah's favors upon you when a force came upon you. Allah Ta'ala helped you with winds. Allah Ta'ala helped you with angels that you could not see. How did Allah help with the wind and the angels? Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Would have been nice to conclude this, but we have an idea with regard to what led to the end of the war and the defeating of the strategy of the allied forces, that they could not achieve their objectives. The actual ending of the war, inshallah, we will continue with that in our next program, inshallah. May Allah Ta'ala give us the tawfiq of understanding the great life of our beloved Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and putting these noble precepts into our life and emulating it. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
لقد كان لكم في رسول الله أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر وذكر الله كثيرا.